I welcome you to this time of reflection, a time when we open ourselves to the power of spirit, a time when we listen for the wisdom and creativity deep within us. And as we center ourselves, we breathe in deeply the gift of breath, the gift of spirit, for in Hebrew, spirit and breath are the same word. And so we breathe in deeply the gift of breath, the gift of spirit, and we allow it to fill our being. And we breathe out gratitude into this circle that we have created. And we breathe in deeply the gift of breath, the gift of spirit. And we breathe out wisdom into this moment. We breathe in deeply the gift of breath, the gift of spirit. And we breathe out creativity. We ground ourselves into the earth upon which we walk, feeling our energy flowing down into the earth that sustains us. We bring our attention up to our heart field. We allow ourselves to step into that energy of our heart field, and we connect one to another in that place. And we pull up and out into the cosmos and look back at all of us who will gather at different times in different places. And we see the points of light that we are together in this world. And so we connect to our true essence, deep in the core of our being, where the power of love is deep within. And we extend that love to one another, and we connect heart to heart to heart to heart. Our readings today begin with a reading that is the theme for our reflections today. It is a poem called Awake, Arise, written by a beloved friend, Fred Joblin. It's actually a hymn, but I'm going to read it as a poem. Fred died of cancer a decade ago, but he left us with much of his wisdom, including this particular hymn, this song. It captures the essence of his theology and mine. Hear it as it's being spoken to you. You are a child blessed by God, made for a purpose that is yours alone. You're not alone as your purpose unfolds. God will be with you, for you are God's own. Awake, arise, the day has come. God has called your name. Soaring with others who ride the same wind, you'll share in the joys and sorrow of flight. Called to bring healing and light to the world, called to community, called to the light. Awake, arise, the day has come. God has called your name. Awake, arise, the day has come. God has called your name. We have two scripture readings for today. And so with that blessing of how God has called us, we turn to these stories of other people's calls. But I invite you to enter into the stories today as though you are experiencing them like the key focus characters of the story. So in this first story, imagine yourself being Samuel in this story. Imagine yourself being there in the temple as the evening deepens. And allow yourself to experience what Samuel is experiencing. So Samuel is ministering to God under Eli, the high priest. The word of God was rare in these days, and visions were not widespread. So that's something about Samuel. You might find it helpful to close your eyes as you imagine yourself there. It is evening, and at this time, Eli, whose eyesight has begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of God where the ark of God was. Then God called, "Samuel, Samuel." And he said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But Eli said to him, "I did not call you. Lie down again." So Samuel went and lay down. God called again, "Samuel." Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But Eli said, "I did not call, my son. Lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know God, and the word of God had not yet been revealed to him. God called Samuel again a third time, and Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." Then Eli perceived that God was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down, and if God calls you, you shall say, 'Here I am. Your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now God came and stood there, calling as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Here I am. Your servant is listening." Then God said to Samuel, "See, I am about to do something that will make both ears of anyone who hears of it tingle." I love the image that when God is doing things, we experience tingles. That's been my experience in life. If something is of spirit, I get a rush of tingles through me. And so, having entered into the story of Samuel and imagining yourself there, if God were to call you in the night, what would the conversation be about? The conversation between God and Samuel was about something very particular to the moment of his life. What would God long to say to you as you are awakened in the night? Our next story of call, you can return to that question, maybe in the middle of the night. This is a story from the Gospel according to Matthew. It is a story also of call. As Jesus walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon and Andrew, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And as he went from there, continuing to walk along the Sea of Galilee, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in the boat with their father Zebedee, mending their nets, and Jesus called them. And immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. And so imagine what that would be like if you were a fisher and you were in your boat doing what you always do, and Jesus came along and called you and invited you to be a fisher of people. And you leave everything behind immediately and go and follow. So enter into that call of Simon and Andrew, James and John. And what would you be leaving behind if you followed immediately? And what would you be feeling as you responded to that call? What would prompt you to leave so immediately and go and follow this one who has been named as the light of the world? And to respond to God's call, what do we as the church need to leave behind so that we are following the one who has been called the light of the world? If we were all in the same room right now and I could ask the question, I suspect many of you would have your hands up. But if I were to ask you a question, how many of you, like Samuel, are awakened in the night? I suspect that hand would be up all over the room. When I was a newly ordained minister, I was just 33 years old, and my second or third funeral was the husband of a woman named Esther. And I went to visit Esther a few weeks after the celebration of life of her husband, and I asked her how she was doing. And she told me that she was doing okay, except that she was waking up every night between 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock. And it was really starting to irritate her because she was simply not getting enough sleep. And what I said to her, my answer to her, I have no idea where it came from, other than spirit was moving in that moment, and I allowed my mouth to be used. For it was not a thought I'd ever had before. And what I said to her is, if you are awakened between 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock, that's God there waking you up to be in conversation with you. And so be open. And honestly, if you are in conversation with God and connecting with God in that moment, you won't be tired in the morning. And it worked for her, and it worked for me, and it's worked for others over the years. So when we're awakened in those hours, be present, listen. You may not hear words, but allow yourself to connect and be nourished by that time. Questions come to us across the seas and the centuries as we listen and enter into the call of Simon and Andrew, James and John. The question that arises is, are we willing to leave behind aspects of our lives for the sake of a greater calling? How willing are we as the church to leave behind aspects of our life together as the church for the sake of a greater calling? In 1994, I went to my second General Council. And at that General Council, we were looking at the new hymn book, what is now Voices United, and we were singing from the sampler. I was introduced to a new piece of music at that time, the much-loved hymn, Here I Am, Lord. It includes the line, Here I am, Lord, and it says, then I will go, Lord, if you lead me. That very first day, sitting in a big gymnasium in Fergus, I wept as I sang that song. I will go, Lord, if you lead me. I wept and I sobbed. I felt like it was a call to leave behind the community that I love. I didn't know then where I'd go. It took another year before I knew the answer to that. But when the call came, I was open. And I was called to a community where I was able to develop my life work. It was a larger community, and I was able to develop my life work of circle culture through small groups and alternative wisdom and connecting with a wider community. Called to leave, knowing that we can be open to how God will lead us. Important awareness in this moment when the world is standing on the brink of new possibilities. We are at a critical pivot point. We are being called in the night to awaken to what is possible, to actively arise and make a difference, to awaken to a different story than the story of brokenness and despair. In a world where much seems to be broken, there is great potential for us as a church, great potential for us to create community, one of our deepest longings, to create a commons where all are welcome, to create a culture of belonging and listening. The world is standing on tippy-toe on the edge of something new. It is time to leave behind things that don't matter anymore, that don't serve the vision, whose seeds are planted in our hearts of a time when the power that reigns is love, which we describe as the kingdom of God in our midst. God is calling us, awakening us to see with the eyes of love, to see where the wholeness is emerging in chaos, to see and nurture where community and well-being are flourishing, to see how powerful it is when we gather together in circles and we listen and think together and create together to find pathways filled with the light of love. God is calling us to awaken to wisdom and leave behind privilege and entitlement so that we are free to focus on life-giving community for all creation. Now, to do this, we need an alternative story to the one that is bombarding us 24 hours a day. When I was 3 years old, I had a mystical experience. It was a vision of life that I presumed everyone had. I'd like to read that experience to you from my book, The Mended Mirror, which focuses on finding pathways of light amidst hard realities. A worthwhile endeavor and focus in these times in which we live. So this was my experience when I was 3 years old. I am in a glorious meadow where warm sunshine fills the air. Butterflies are flitting everywhere. I hear the song of a multitude of birds and the splashing dance of the creek. I hear the voices of others in the meadow. I can see them out of the corner of my eye as I run and twirl with delight amongst the flowers that blow in the gentle breeze. The breeze carries the warmth of the sun and kisses my face. When I come to the center of the meadow, I stop. Everywhere I look, I see light. Light pouring out of the people, light flowing like a wave around the butterflies and blossoms, light emanating from me. I see light all around me, coming from within me and from within every living thing. Now, I don't exactly see the light with my eyes, but I see the light with an inner vision that feels more real than what my eyes see. This guiding vision makes the world a magical, mystical place, filled with possibilities, potential beyond our imaginings, and peace that is deep and profound. For me, the light is the energy of the divine. I know deep within me that the light all around us and within us is the power of love. In the early years of my life, this is how I think everyone sees the world. Throughout my life, this memory informs how I see people and how I engage life. It is a reflection of my profound sense of knowing that the divine is intimately present and can be found deep within all of us. It is an energy that connects us to life rooted in love. I return to the feeling of the experience in moments when I am particularly challenged to see the light and goodness that is within all of us. This memory roots me in an awareness that ensures that even in the midst of the struggles of life, I can see the amazing capacity we have to let love shine and creativity flow through our lives. When I was 7 years old, I had an experience of claiming an alternative story than the one told in movie star magazines whose pictures were all over the bedroom walls of my sister-in-law and I, but where in those movie star magazines where a few are lifted up and the rest of us subtly told we are not worthy. The summer I am 7, my older sister and I make up a game where each of us choose an imaginary family. Janice chooses famous people. I choose people I know, until she picks John Lennon. Then I claim Paul McCartney. Her response? But I want all the Beatles. I think for a moment and then I say, okay, you pick anyone you want in your family, and my family will be everyone else. You don't want people in prison. Yes, I do. You don't want people who live on the street. Yes, I do. The list continues, punctuated with my adamant, yes, I do. That childhood game still impacts my life. When I walk down a street or walk amongst a congregation where I am a stranger, I look at people and I think, you don't know it, but I chose you to be in my family. And you, and you, and you, I chose all of you to be in my family. A powerful story. a powerful perspective, an alternative story to the story of the conversations of my childhood. A new story emerged in my life the night of July 23rd, 2020 at 5:52 p.m. It was the night after my husband's partial knee replacement. It had been done in day surgery because I'd be there to help him at home. On that particular evening, he was in excruciating pain. And in the midst of that overwhelming pain that I could do nothing to ease, the phone rang. I answered. It was the doctor, but it was my doctor. The message whooshed through me. You have cancer. My life pivoted. 5 days later, I found out it was not going to be a simple solution of surgery like we had all hoped. It was a different type of cancer that was more aggressive. There would be surgery plus 7 months of treatment. Survival rate went from 95% to 55%. Knowing that the story we tell ourselves impacts how we engage, I knew I needed an alternative image or metaphor for this pilgrimage with cancer, rather than it being a fight. That image works for many. I knew it wouldn't work for me. And so as I came to each step of the journey, I developed a different way of engaging it. When I came to the surgery, I approached it with gratitude. Gratitude for the parts that would be leaving and taking the cancer with them, and the parts of me that would be staying and enduring the incision and the treatment. Deep gratitude. When it came time to begin chemo 6 weeks later, I had aligned myself with the understanding that chemo is like the golden light of healing, helping me and the rogue cancer cells to return to my authentic purpose. For the rogue cancer cells to stop lingering and lasting longer than they were supposed to or intended to last, and to stop doing a rapid multiplying that they were doing. And the healing light would help them move along to what had actually been their intention, their authentic intention, their authentic purpose. When it came to radiation, it was a little bit harder for me to come up with a metaphor, but I eventually came up with a metaphor that radiation is like a controlled burn in the forest. It's just a slow burn that takes out the debris so that what is healthy and vital can continue to thrive. Living with new images, new metaphors, new understandings, help us to engage the world in the way that we long to in any given moment that we're in. I had another new understanding at the age of 33. I was an intern for ministry, and the experience happened during the week of guided prayer. It gave language to me of a new understanding that explained what my experience was like in life and what the spiritual journey is all about. On the first day of the week of guided prayer, we were invited into a time of meditation. We were invited to go down deep inside of ourselves as though we were going down an elevator. And when the doors open on the elevator, we can step into this space that is deep within us. And as I stepped into this space that is deep within us, I looked around and it was like a war-torn landscape. Huge boulders obscured the path. Dust everywhere made it difficult to see. I stumbled along trying to find my way into this place deep within me that they had invited me to travel to, until I came to a steel wall. And when I came to the steel wall, it provided me with guidance as to how to walk along in the area safely. And I could see that at the far end of the steel wall, there was light. And so I climbed up a landscape of rocks, and the light grew stronger. And just at that moment, as I was getting closer to the light, the leader in the week of guided prayer invited us to return to the room. The next day, I told my spiritual director about the experience, and she suggested to me that I should return and follow the light. Didn't really have a lot of desire to go back into that war-torn landscape, but I trusted her wisdom. And down I went, came to the war-torn landscape again, found the metal wall, climbed up the landscape of rocks. The light grew stronger. When I got to the very top of the pile of rocks, I peered around the wall. And on the other side of the wall was the most beautiful meadow, just like that meadow when I was 3 years old. I went into the meadow and looked around. And then when it was time, I returned to the place where I was meeting with my spiritual director. I shared what I had experienced, and she gave me a teaching that has impacted my life ever since. She said, "This is the description of what a spiritual journey is." And she drew 3 concentric circles onto a piece of paper. She said, the outer circle is life that swirls all around us. Then the middle circle is filled with external demands. It's filled with our experiences of life, but it's also filled with fear, that sense of worthlessness that we too often experience, and that critical voice that can come in and judge us pretty harshly. But then there's a center circle. And in the center circle, that is the place where we remember that we are a beloved child of God. And what she said is that we live too often in the middle circle. And the middle circle grows and encroaches upon the center circle, and often even covers it over. But the goal of the spiritual journey is to reconnect to the center, to connect to the divine within, to connect to the power of the authentic self, the part of us that is eternal, which means the part of us that is love. So that when we connect to that core circle of our authentic selves, who we are as a beloved child of God, we respond to life rather than react to life. And we are grounded in that place of love. That was a huge awakening for me. And the image began to expand over the years as I began to develop my life work of circle culture, or what I now call authentic connection culture. I began to realize that the goal of life is to be connected to our own beloved child of God, but also to the beloved child of God in others, and to be able to see it in them, even if they can't. And then I took it further to say, when we see the beloved child of God of one another, when we gather in community together in a circle, we connect to the beloved child of God and me to the beloved child of God, and the person beside me and beside her, that person, and beside him, and beside them, and beside all the different ones around the circle. And then we allow our energy to coalesce in the center, which is the place where we engage with the Spirit's wisdom and the Spirit's creativity. So connecting to our authentic self and allowing ourselves to truly be present cracks us open and allows us to share that wisdom that is deep within us and the creativity that we have as we think and ponder together. It taps into that so that we're tapping the wisdom and creativity within us and amongst us, so that together we find pathways of light and future possibilities amidst hard times. Finding an alternative story, an alternative image, an alternative metaphor to define us and guide us as the church. A story that calls us to be open, to leave behind things that don't matter anymore. A story that calls us to question, so we are on a quest for wholeness, where well-being of all creation is our natural focus, and our mindsets and our lifestyles are nudged by Spirit, and we are empowered to be part of the much-needed transformation in our world. A story that draws us into circles, where differing ideas are welcome and violence or bullying are not tolerated, which means we end up creating an alternative culture of radical welcome and belonging, which is so needed in our world. Questions for our pilgrimage, for our quest into a new way of being, arise from our mythic, well-known and well-loved stories of the seasons of our lives. We begin our calendar year with Epiphany, which raises the question, are we following pathways filled with light to an unknown destination where we are willing to share our resources and gifts? Or have we become a little bit complacent and not looking for that light anymore? And within Epiphany, we have the baptism story, which is so central to who we are. Can we see all who we meet with eyes of love and know them and us to be beloved? And in Lent, can we choose, like Jesus did, a pathway rooted in God's intent of love, rather than choosing pathways that are the way of the world, of control and greed? And Holy Week, in what way are we betraying our purpose as the church? A question we need to be asking ourselves. Are we caught in entitlement or privilege, remembering that it's difficult to see, but are we willing to hear other stories so that we can learn if we are, or that we are, and how we are? Are we committed to creating beloved community where all will be welcome? Easter, the story of Easter, invites us to look at an alternative vision, to ask ourselves the question, what new life is emerging for us to nourish and nurture? Are we being blinded by death-dealing mindsets? And Pentecost, how is Spirit calling us to be born anew? What are our gifts to be shared? Are we open to understanding, communicating, and listening to strangers so we build community together? Remember that on that day, they were all speaking different languages, but they understood each other. Are we willing to be open to understand and communicate? Advent and Christmas, the end of our calendar year in the seasons of our lives. What seeds have been planted that we are called to make room for in our world? How is love being birthed, and how can we be of assistance? Awake, arise. God is calling our name. There are two overarching stories that inspire me on the journey to wholeness and centeredness. The first one is the Kingdom of God stories. I love, for example, the parable of the yeast, how we as the church mix in tiny seeds that are love, and we all rise together. Not as a church, but we, the world, all rises together as we stir in love. And the parable that reminds us that we don't hide our light under a bushel basket, but we let it shine so all can see, so all can gather in light, so all are encouraged to let their light shine. The second major story that is an overarching story in my journey is the Isaiah vision of a world transformed. It aligns with the goal of Pachamama Alliance, an organization that's worldwide that I became part of in 2006, whose goal is to create a human presence on this earth that is environmentally sustainable, socially just, and spiritually fulfilling. From Isaiah, we hear that the time will come when deserts will blossom. Environmental sustainability in a world that has created dust bowls by our consumerism. From Isaiah, the time will come when we will turn swords into plowshares. Social justice, all will be fed. From Isaiah, the time will come when the wolf will lie down with the lamb. Spiritually fulfilling, for spirituality is about relationships, and when the hierarchical powers no longer separate us, we experience spiritual fulfillment. There is a global movement happening of grassroots circles making a significant positive difference. In 2004, 16 years ago now, Paul Hawkins wrote the book Blessed Unrest, where he identified over 250,000 groups happening worldwide that have a positive impact for well-being in the world. By 2008, he had begun to tabulate over 2 million groups that were still growing to focus on the well-being for all. As the church, I believe that we need to intentionally be part of this movement. Yes, gather to be strengthened. Yes, gather to model the experience of healthy community, but intentionally reach out to connect, to create space for conversation with our wider community, to create a culture of engaged citizens, to create a commons of belonging where we have the important conversations that we need to have. We stand on the brink of new possibilities at a pivot point in our story. We have the opportunity and the responsibility to impact what emerges. The Gospel of John says that Jesus said that we will have even greater things than he did because the Spirit is with us. Yes, the Spirit is calling and empowering us in these turbulent and wondrous times. Blessings pour upon us as we go forth and share our gifts, as we collaborate with others, as we are bold and courageous for the purpose of love. This is our call as a church. Awake, arise. God has called our name, and we are called into action, an action that is rooted in love. And so let us go forth into the world with a daring and tender love. The world is waiting. Go in peace. And all that you do, do it by the power of love that is deep within you. And as we journey, may we see the face of God's love in everyone we meet. And may everyone we meet see the face of God's love in us. May it be so. Amen.